Eliza May Harper lay curled in the dust just beyond the bend, where wagon wheels rarely passed and voices never lingered. Evening pressed down heavy and blue, the sky bruised with the promise of night. Her breath came shallow, one palm resting over the rise of her belly, as if to remind herself that something still lived because she did. The earth beneath her was cold, uncaring, yet familiar in its silence. She had learned, by then, not to expect rescue from places that had already turned their faces away. There had been doors before this road, doors with brass handles polished by other hands, other lives. She remembered knocking on one not long ago, the sound too small for the courage it took to make it. Mrs. Ruth Calder had answered, her eyes sharp as broken glass, taking in Eliza's swollen belly before lifting her chin in practiced judgment. No room, no charity, no tolerance for shame that dared breathe the same air as respectability. The door closed with a sound that felt final, as though it had sealed something inside Eliza that would never quite open again. The church steps were worse, not because words were spoken, but because none were. Women she once sewed beside turned their faces away, fingers tightening around prayer books, as if holiness were something fragile that could be broken by proximity. Even the sheriff, standing stiff beneath his badge, had only sighed. "Towns survive on order," he said. "And order has no place for mistakes that walk and breathe and remind people of what they wish not to see." So Eliza walked. She walked until the town fell behind her, until the gossip thinned and the land grew wide and empty enough to hold her grief without echo. Each step was an argument with her own body, aching and heavy with new life she had sworn to protect even when she could barely protect herself. Hunger gnawed. Shame weighed more than the child she carried. Yet she kept moving because stopping felt too close to surrender. At night, she slept beneath trees whose branches did not ask questions. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering apologies to the life inside her for a world that had already failed them both. Stars watched without judgment. The wind moved through dry grass like a long-held breath being released. Time slowed there, stretched thin by loneliness, each hour measured not by clocks, but by how long she could endure the ache in her back, the fear tightening her chest. By the third day, her legs betrayed her. She reached a narrow creek, water glinting weakly in the late sun, and sank to her knees. The world tilted. She thought of her mother's hands once, cool against her fevered brow when she was small. Thought of warmth. Thought of nothing at all. That was when the shadow crossed her vision. He did not rush. He did not shout. The man stood a few paces away, as still as the pines behind him, as if he understood that suddenness could shatter what little strength she had left. His beard was threaded with gray, his coat worn thin at the elbows, boots dusted with the same earth she lay upon. His eyes were tired but clear, the kind shaped by years of watching rather than judging. He offered her water. No questions, no startled looks. Just a canteen held steady until her shaking hands could close around it. She drank slowly, the coolness pulling her back from the edge. When she finished, he spread a blanket over her shoulders, movements careful, almost reverent, as though he feared breaking something sacred without quite knowing why. His cabin sat not far from the creek, rough-hewn and quiet, smoke curling faintly from the chimney, like a promise that life continued there. He helped her stand, his grip firm but gentle, never lingering where it might be misunderstood. Inside, the space was sparse but clean, a table scarred by years of use, a hearth that had known many winters, the kind of place built not for comfort, but for survival. "You can stay the night," he said at last. His voice was low and used, as if words were tools he only brought out when necessary. No welcome followed, no warning either. Eliza nodded, afraid that gratitude, spoken aloud, might tip the balance and send her back into the dark. She slept on a pallet near the fire, the crackle of burning would easing something knotted deep inside her. For the first time in days, she did not dream of doors closing. Morning came quietly. Light crept through the small window, dust motes drifting like suspended memories. Eliza woke stiff and uncertain, bracing herself for the inevitable, the gentle clearing of a throat, the polite request to move on. Instead, she found bread on the table. Fresh water. The man gone, already out tending to whatever life required of him. She ate slowly, almost guiltily, each bite a fragile thing she feared might be taken back. When he returned, he said nothing, just nodded once, as if acknowledging her presence without claiming it. Another night followed, then another morning, each day marked by small, unspoken kindnesses. A log added to the fire before dawn, a blanket mended where it had torn, space given without distance, care offered without ownership. Eliza remained watchful, ready to leave at the first sign that she had overstayed what mercy she'd been granted. But the sign never came. Instead, something subtle shifted. Her shoulders lowered. Her breath deepened. She found herself humming while washing her hands in the creek, a tune she hadn't known she remembered. Shame did not vanish, but it loosened its hold, like a fist slowly unclenching. On the third morning, she stood in the doorway of the cabin and realized she was still there. The mountain did not push her away. The man did not ask her to go. And in that quiet, unremarkable miracle, something inside Eliza May Harper began, at last, to believe she might not be finished yet. The days did not announce themselves. They arrived softly, one after another, like snow settling on a roof without sound. Eliza learned the rhythm of the mountain by watching Silas Boone move through it. He rose before the light, split wood with steady patience, spoke only when words were useful. In his quiet, there was no accusation. In his solitude, no demand that she explain herself. She began helping where she could. At first, it was small things, wiping the table, rinsing cups at the creek. Later, when her strength allowed, she cooked simple meals, the smell of bread warming the cabin in a way that felt almost like belonging. Silas never praised, never corrected. He ate what she made and left an extra portion untouched, as if always preparing for the possibility that she might need more than she thought. One afternoon, she noticed the cradle. It stood near the wall, rough and unpainted, its edges sanded smooth by careful hands. Silas said nothing when he saw her looking at it. He only went back to mending a harness, needle flashing in the light. Eliza's throat tightened. No one had prepared a place for her child before. Not the town, not her family, not even herself. The mountain man had done it quietly, without ceremony, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Word, however, has a way of climbing hills no matter how high they rise. By the time the leaves began to turn, the town had remembered her again. Sheriff Whitlow rode up one gray morning, hat pulled low, eyes uneasy. He spoke of propriety, of whispers, of how a man living alone with a woman in trouble invited questions. Silas listened without interruption, hands resting on the fence he'd built years earlier. When the sheriff finished, Silas only said that Eliza stayed by her own choosing. Nothing more, nothing less. The words lodged inside her like a seed. Then Ezekiel Harper came. Blood does not always bring mercy with it. He stood stiff and uncomfortable in the doorway, his gaze skimming past Eliza, as if she were a stain he hoped not to touch. He spoke of saving face, of arrangements that could be made if she returned quietly. There were families who might take the baby. He said people who could give a proper name. Eliza felt the old shame rise, hot and familiar, curling around her ribs until breathing became work again. That night, she packed her few belongings. The mountain was kind, but kindness, she had learned, could wear thin. At dawn, rain began to fall, cold and relentless. She stepped outside, bag in hand, heart hammering with the certainty that leaving was the price of not being a burden. Silas watched from the doorway. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, and the sound of his voice seemed to steady the air itself. He told her of the woman he had once loved, of the child he never got to hold, of how silence had become easier than grief, and solitude safer than hope. He did not reach for her. He did not ask her to stay. He only said that no one had ever been a burden for needing shelter, and that the mountain had room for more than one wounded soul. When Ezekiel returned with the sheriff, there was no shouting, no threats. Silas stood between them and the cabin, calm as stone. Eliza felt something shift inside her then, Not fear, not shame, but a quiet certainty. She stepped forward on her own, placed a hand over her belly, and said she was staying. Not because she was rescued, because she chose to be. The storm broke that night. Wind rattled the walls, rain drummed the roof, and pain came in waves that stole her breath. Silas worked without panic, hands sure, voice low, a steady presence when the world narrowed to survival. When the child cried, the sound cut through the storm like light. Eliza wept then, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that she had endured. The mountain was silent in the days that followed. Snow dusted the ground, clean and bright. Eliza held her child by the fire, watching Silas rock the cradle he had built with such care. No promises were spoken. None were needed. What grew there was not loud, nor hurried. It was made of mornings, of shared meals, of glances that carried respect instead of ownership. I tell you this because some lives are nearly lost not to violence, but to abandonment. Because dignity can be rebuilt in places the world forgets. And because sometimes the thing that saves us does not arrive as a miracle, but as a man who makes room and stays.